I give you J.C. Watson, former HISC planner and creator of the state Albizia strategic plan.
Just the primary author. There's many co-authors. Thanks, Randy, and thanks, Josh, for you guys for hosting me today. Is there a way that I can scroll the things, or I just signal you, and you'll do the next one? Okay. So, yeah, today I'm going to be, me and Franny Brewer from the Big Island Invasive Species Committee are going to be talking about managing Albizia. And my part, really, I'm going to get into kind of the overview of the HISC strategic plan and then what we've been doing as far as implementation for watershed purposes and stuff like that. So, okay, let's get started. So first of all, a little bit of background about Albizia falcoteria molucana and its presence in Hawaii. So it's an incredibly fast-growing tropical tree. It can grow up to 15 feet per year and get above 200 feet in height. It's been called the fastest growing tree on the planet in Hawaii. It grows faster here and with a larger growth curve than it does in its native range of Papua New Guinea and Molucana and kind of Indonesia area. But basically, it's in the legume family, so it's nitrogen fixing. It's a prolific seed producer. The seeds are easily dispersed via the wind. The seeds don't really drop out of the pods. The pods break open and then flutter in a spinning motion and can travel great distances on a nice little breeze. It's a threat to native Hawaiian ecosystems, infrastructure, agriculture, and human health through crowding out native species and changing the soil profile and chemistry in our native ecosystems. Infrastructure, due to the fast growth, the roots can cause damage to sidewalks, roads, foundations, and since the trees are prone to what's known as sudden limb shear or limb drop, which is an innate weakness in just the structure of the tree. They drop massive branches without any noticeable reason or cause, really. So that's a threat to infrastructure and the human health component for sure. And then agriculture, due to the fast growth and their love for freshly bulldozed lands, they're definitely an ag pest. And then if you're practicing crop rotation and you're allowing your fields to fallow for a number of years, if you have a mass germination event with trees that grow 15 feet per year across a 40-acre plot that's been fallow for 2 years, you have like 30-foot trees, which is then beyond the capability of your tractor to simply till them back into the soil. So that can become potentially cost prohibitive in the agriculture sector. As far as how they got here, they were intentionally introduced in 1917 during the early forestry plantation days when our watersheds were completely denuded from improper agriculture and cattle, and then there was mass planting statewide in the early 1920s.
And that planting was done by state government or
territorial?
Yeah, the territorial government at the time.
Okay.
So this is just an overview slide of kind of how massive these trees can get. Yeah, a lot of these photos came from Bisq and Hawaii News Now, and I even took a couple of them. But that big photo is the Kalihiwai Bridge on Kauai. That population has been cleared a number of times, and it's really stunning vista of those trees. Below you can see the view of Mauna Kea and the lone Albizia there on the left, and then fast forward I forget how many years later. I think that one picture. Franny, do you know when that picture was taken on the bottom left?
No. Oh, that's 1980, I believe.
So 1980, thank you. And then the one on the right of it is the same location, and I think that was taken like 2016 or something like that by Bisq folks. So you can see the dramatic change in view plane that occurs, as well as forest structure, just in that one simple before and after photo. And then on the right, you have a couple images of the destructive capabilities of these trees. These are post-hurricane or post-tropical storm Iselle images from the lower Puna district. So essentially what we're looking at is, 100 years of no management, and that, really required a unique approach, for an established species that's, covers like approximately 20,000 heavily infested acres here on Oahu, I think it's about 43,000 estimated infested acres on Big Island, and then the other islands haven't been calculated yet. So essentially what the HISC plan was, it's a statewide strategic plan, a high-level plan that outlines kind of these broad spectrum efforts that are necessary to start even, the planning process of tackling a species like this. So the plan encompasses, the refined techniques such as IPA, which was developed by Dr. James Leary out of the University of Hawaii, which was awesome. That was a great arrow to the Achilles heel in Albizia. And then it goes over coordinated efforts between multiple state agencies, private utility companies, and species committees, watershed partnerships, and then a community component, because these, as invasive species don't know boundaries and property lines, they readily come up in residential areas, in people's landscaping, and people don't realize what they are, and before they know it, they got a 30-foot tree that's overhanging their home, and now it's there's a cost associated with it, and then they put it off, and 5 years later, it's this, a 50-foot tree, and 20 years later, it's an 80-foot tree, and it's going to cost them, upwards of $10,000 at that point for sure. And the next step, so after these kind of coordinated efforts to tackle this species problem, is the implementation of the plan, and then finally the community empowerment part. So essentially, I guess I kind of went over this, but the purpose of this plan is to provide, an overarching guidance for addressing Albizia on a statewide scale, and it, is kind of the roadmap for going forward. It included an initial infestation assessment, which was done for Oahu. You can use it to inform lawmakers on the problem and the techniques that can be used to address it. It also can be used to potentially increase designated funding, whether that be tax breaks for removal on private property, hazard assessments along popular trails, greater funding to invasive species work, etc. And then it also provided a management plan template, which could be used for site-specific, on-the-ground boots in action planning for a specific watershed, for example. So kind of the main control techniques that the plan goes over, it does go over a number of them, is the incision point application, which like I mentioned, was developed out of the University of Hawaii under Dr. James Leary. And there was a conditional use label for the milestone specialty herbicide, which has been approved into the main label, which is great. And it's this technique is really, really effective, and it's really, really cost effective as well, because you can treat a 150-foot, 250-foot tree for less than $5 in herbicide cost, not taking into account human cost and access, which would definitely be the largest cost associated with gaining access to trees like this in the middle of nowhere, or in the upper watershed areas that are helicopter access only. That being said, there are a number of control techniques out there other than incision point application. You can girdle Albizias. You can ring bark them like they do in Samoa. You could potentially use HBT technology, and we're starting to explore aerial applications actually this year too. So number of different control techniques, both with herbicide and non-herbicide applications, which is pretty cool. Okay, kind of the next part of the plan was the interagency coordination. So something that's statewide in scale, cross boundaries, cross kuleanas. Definitely having a whole bunch of people coordinating together and is going to be very, very critical to making any headway at all. So, this is just kind of outlines a few of the major players. The Hawaii Invasive Species Council, which created this plan, the Big Island Invasive Species Committee, which was the spearhead and really got the Albizia ball rolling in the state and got it in the headlines and started the technique and paved the way for the community engagement. I mean, that's just an amazing program, and they've done so much for forwarding Albizia management in the state. And then the Hawaiian Electric Company on Big Island as well, because they ponied up some money to, like you can see down below, all the Albizia trees treated in a buffer along a main power line corridor. And then, of course, the Department of Transportation, because as you saw in some of the earlier images, when these trees come down and they're adjacent to roads, it makes these roads completely inaccessible for primary responders, residents, you name it, utilities. And yeah, so that's kind of the interagency part of it, I guess. It was all catalyzed by Hurricane Isabel. So moving into plan implementation, I just have a screenshot there from one of the tables within the plan. And there's kind of 4 sectors that the plan addresses with objectives and implementation tasks. One is impacts, and that's kind of the physical impact of the trees. You can see in that side table that there's a need for a lot of things, from mitigation of hazards to reduce funding to studying the economic impact to even assessing where are the Albizias and how much linear miles of roads are potentially can be impacted. So there's a lot of information still out there that we need to know before you can kind of move forward. But within the plan itself, there's 19 different objectives across those 4 different sectors and 54 individual implementation tasks. So pretty substantive.
Wow, almost as much as the Hawaii biosecurity plan. That's one species.
Okay, so kind of moving into what I've been doing with the Watershed Partnership is kind of these upper watershed control and containment strategies, because we have areas that are incredibly highly impacted, like you see Manoa Valley there on the bottom left, and then areas where really there's less than 25 trees in an entire 1,500 acre watershed, like on the image on the right. So kind of 2 different strategies are needed, and the containment strategy, that's really nothing. Well, both of these strategies are really nothing new when it comes to invasive species control, but kind of using them for such a widespread species, I think, is kind of the novel approach. And if you take it one watershed at a time, one area at a time, each one's going to be a little bit different, and having these multiple strategies and ways of addressing it, kind of a top-down ahupua'a approach is going to be effective. So that's kind of like what you see in the Manoa one, that 1, 2, 3 units. That's so that summit area is going to be relatively low numbers of Albizia, if any. And then same with number 2 and number 3, and then the lower area, which isn't polygoned out, is completely infested. And addressing that is a completely different ball game when assessing what's done in the upper watershed. Because in the upper watershed, we can do IPA technique, to control all those trees. There's no established, trails that, a force 100 people go on per day. The trees are well off and up there, and they can be allowed to decompose in place and have, really no impact to. They're all non-hazard. Whereas down in the lower area, there's just so many people and everything, and then, the coordinated efforts down there are going to be substantial. But we'll get there, and it'll involve a lot of players, I guess. And then the regional eradication, at least on Oahu, and I'm sure it's the same on some of these other islands where you just have 1 or 2 incipient Albizia, get them in, and, it's taken them 100 years to expand up to Upper Waiawa. And you can, foreseeably eradicate all of those and set it back, a century, essentially, which is really, really cool. So, yeah, that's kind of the containment and regional eradication strategy. And then on the other hand, you have the need for prioritization. So this is another watershed on Oahu, the Kipapa National Forest. Up there, yeah, it's the National Refuge, Forest Refuge. Sorry. And as you can see, there's a lot of trees that we've found with multiple ways of finding them, both from on-the-ground surveys, aerial surveys, and then using remote sensing and analyzing aerial images to map and plot these out. So even this, this is kind of a daunting task, and this is something we've been looking at, how do we tackle areas like this that are so inaccessible. In this whole unit, there's like 12 landing zones, something like that, with nothing in the interior core. So just the access alone is going to be a daunting task.
Is Kipapa Gulch the valley when you're going up H2 and
Yes.
Okay, just before Malilani Mauka?
Yeah, so that's Kipapa Gulch, and this is way more Mauka in the headwaters of that.
Okay.
of that valley. And then this feeds directly into the Pearl Harbor Aquifer, which is the primary aquifer for all of Oahu's freshwater. So, yeah, so this is, I mean, like I just put this up there for prioritization. We are, in the planning process of trying to figure out how to do this and get access. We have it split up into sub-management units and all that kind of stuff, and we can get kind of the low-hanging fruit in the summit and work our way down, similar to what we would do in Manoa or Waiawa.
And so this is Waiawa here, right?
Yeah.
So what's below? Is it similar in density?
When you get farther down, they've really creeped up. But there's also this weird pattern where some valleys it doesn't creep up very fast, and then the adjacent valley will be full. Just wind patterns or something, I'm not sure. Okay. And then another thing which is kind of cool is, the alternative use for materials. And I've, spoke quite a bit about with Joey from the Albizia project, and his team, really showed that Albizia wood, which we all thought was kind of rubbish wood, can be used for lumber, and it meets the tensile strength or whatever that test is for the industry standard, and it's comparable with Douglas fir. So, not saying that we should put in a whole bunch of logging roads and log our upper watersheds, because that would definitely cause much more damage than good. But in these areas where there are hazard trees that need to be pieced down, adjacent to residential, this wood doesn't have to go into the landfill. It can be used for a number of things, from a canoe that was made for some Maui Canoe Festival, and then they've started shipping surfboards out of it too. On Kauai, they use it for biomass production with green energy. And who knows what other potential uses there are out there for a nitrogen-rich, wood that is actually kind of a beautiful wood.
Yeah.
It's just,
They've been using Albizia for that Maui Canoe Festival for years.
Yeah.
This might also be a good motivator for people who have vacant lots that have become overgrown with Albizia, so they're not hazard trees. But, if you were one of those lots it was cleared years ago, a bunch of Albizia came up, and you are on the fence about whether or not you want to do something with that property, at least now there might be a economic value associated with clearing that out.
Yeah, absolutely. You just got to be cognizant of that, kind of double-edged sword if you start promoting that, because then if you have 60-foot Albizia on your property and that equates to X dollars, well, what if those were 100 feet? Then is that more dollars in wood costs? So it's like, I don't really want to, I think through the use of these materials, the intention is not to produce a economic driving industry that would result in the greater plantings of Albizia. Okay. And then finally, biocontrol. So, due to these vast areas that are heavily infested, biocontrol is definitely something that needs to be really, really considered and put on the table. And, since 2015, HISC has been supporting Albizia-specific biocontrol out of the U.S. Forest Service. There's been a number of potential candidates. To my understanding, they weren't specific enough to kind of allow for further research, but there's continued interest in this subject, and I think it's definitely something that needs to be pursued. Bringing them in check. As with any biocontrol, it's not an eradication. It's more of just making these trees another tree in the forest as opposed to the entire forest. And then finally, pretty soon we'll be dovetailing into Franny's presentation, is the community empowerment, and the work they did with their Albizia assassin teams and hosting these trainings for community members, on proper control techniques, hazard tree identification, and then, all the resources that they created to allow and empower these owners to engage with neighbors and take ownership of control activities in the community was really awesome. So I guess at that's pretty much all I got. We can queue up Franny, and I'll take questions at the end.